One more round of applause. We're celebrating 25 years, ladies and gentlemen. That's incredible. Well, thank you so much. I am thrilled to be back again this year. What a great location. And we have a great program planned for you. In fact, we're going to get right into it right now, as I would like to introduce our first speaker of the evening, Dr. Paul Park. Dr. Park started his journey with Timmy as an undergraduate at Indiana University, Bloomington's campus, in the Timmy chapter. He is currently serving on the Timmy Board of Directors and is the Senior Director of Programs at Solid Ground in Seattle, Washington. Once again, Dr. Paul Park.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm a little tall, so. All right, well, first, it's so great to be back home. I'm from Indiana, always wonderful to be back here. And so I want to thank each and every one of you, in particular, for being here to support Timmy Global Health. So we've learned about the name change to Timmy Global Health. And to be honest, when I first learned about that name change, I was really excited. And it's because the words global health actually have a very important, unique meaning that has its own history. And it actually fits our mission as well as our logo, that fingerprint or handprint of a child with the picture of the map of the world on it. And let me explain. So the term global health used to actually be in the 70s and 80s and even through the 90s, international health or international medicine. The distinguishment from international medicine to global health is actually quite significant. Whereas international medicine or international health was really a focus on US trained researchers and physicians going out, doing service, doing research, et cetera, and then coming back. The transition to global health was actually not just to focus about going out of the US, but actually to realize that the US is part of one whole system. And that in the same way that physicians and researchers are leaving the US, we also need people to focus on right here at home. A good example is currently, they mentioned my current job at Solid Ground is actually to focus on the domestic vulnerably housed and those who are facing food insecurity. And so, in addition to the distinguishment between global health and international health in terms of a shared burden of disease or a shared challenge, it actually goes an additional step. And that is a bi-directional exchange of knowledge, resources, and values. In other words, it's not just about going somewhere and giving and coming back. There is a bi-directional change. I think this is best exemplified for those of you who have gone on a Timmy trip on that last night when there's reflections. I'm sure many of you heard over and over again, I feel like I have actually received more than I have given. I said the exact same thing back in 2003 as an undergrad at IU on my first Timmy trip. And I can tell you from firsthand experience doing this global health work, that bi-directional exchange gets bigger and bigger and bigger. That knowledge I'm able to gain, resources and strengthening my values, in particular, compassion and solidarity, that never stops growing. And so tonight, as we celebrate 25 years of Timmy Global Health, I want to share my Timmy story, which is just one of many, as a way to demonstrate the impact of these Timmy trips on me, but also the global community. So my first experience in terms of having that exchange, that global exchange and learning from the global community was actually right here in Indiana because my parents are immigrants from Korea. And growing up in an immigrant household, I was exposed to different values, customs, and cultures that many others in this room may not be familiar with. So my father, he immigrated to the US in 1972 as a foreign exchange student to DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana. That's how we ended up in Indiana. And he came from a rural village in South Korea, 8 siblings. The oldest son had the responsibility, the family duty to help lift his family out of poverty. He would go on to get an MBA at Butler University and successfully support his family, long story short, both in South Korea as well as here in Indiana. He's been teaching and running and managing his own Taekwondo school for over 45 years, is now a 9th degree black belt, which makes him a grandmaster. And yes, I was forced to do Taekwondo. So in terms of values and that exchange of values, I probably got more than my fair share of discipline. But that was part of my upbringing, and that was really an important part of who I am today. Now, in addition to instilling and exchanging these values of hard work, family honor, I want to specifically focus on 2, solidarity and compassion. I'm going to bring those 2 up over and over again, solidarity and compassion. So with solidarity, my father demonstrated having solidarity to immigrants, to those who were in difficult situations, because he walked in their shoes. So if we were at a restaurant, if we were taking a taxi cab, if he met another immigrant, he would always ask them how they're doing, encourage them, give advice, push them to keep going through the hardships, give them a little extra tip. And that was his way to demonstrate that, it's okay to give preferential treatment towards those who are struggling. He also used and leveraged his Taekwondo programs and partnerships to start a government-funded Taekwondo program in Puerto Rico for underserved children. And of course, my mother, I want to focus on compassion. My mom was a head ICU nurse in Korea, and so she knows firsthand bedside manners, what it means to be right at the front lines with someone who is suffering in their most oftentimes challenging moments of their lives, and how to be compassionate in those critical moments. She also made a point to instill and remind me of important social struggles around women's equality and historical injustices that stem from those inequities. So those values that I was able to learn from my parents really fed into my next step, which was going to Brebeuf High School. For those of you who are familiar with, this is a Jesuit school. Their motto is men and women for others. They very much support and put at the forefront social justice as an important tenet of education. And there I was reunited with one of my childhood friends. Some of you know him, Dionisi Alaprantis. And Dionisi was my link to Chuck. Dionisi and Chuck had a great friendship, and Dionisi and other classmates had learned about Timmy, pulled me along. That's the first time I met Chuck was in high school. And that was the first time that they asked me, hey, we're going on a trip, you've got to come. And that was the first of many, as you will learn, where I turned to my dad and asked for permission, and he said, no, it's not safe, there's no reason to go, it's not worth it, no. So then I would go on and go to Indiana University in Bloomington, and there my friend Dionisi and some of his friends started the first Timmy chapter. So this was back in 2001. The first Timmy chapter was in IU Bloomington. And again, they asked me, freshman, sophomore year, Paul, you gotta come, this is amazing. I agreed, it seemed amazing, but it was only something on paper for me. I still didn't really understand it, but I still asked, and my father still said no. Come junior year, by then I declared I was a chemistry major with the intention of getting a PhD in chemistry. And my ritual of asking my dad to go on a Timmy trip for spring break, and he said yes. And to this day, no one knows why that happened, but it happened. And so I get to go on my first Timmy trip as a junior, and we go to Honduras. Daryl Wheeler is here, and I'm so happy to see him. He was the lead of that trip, and I can say that it was the first time for me to witness firsthand a few things. 1, extreme poverty. 2, social injustice that was so glaringly obvious, not that we don't have it throughout the world, but as a young person, so glaringly obvious that it forced me to ask all the questions. Why are people poor? What are the consequences of poverty? What were the historical and socioeconomic injustices that led to poverty? And what are their needs? Furthermore, I was able to witness firsthand physicians. It was actually the first time I shadowed a physician at all. And I was able to see physicians working hand in hand between US and local providers, coming together with the local providers leading and sharing. In our context, in this environment, when you feel like you have two hands tied behind your back because you don't have the diagnostic tests, you don't have the treatments you need, this is what you do. This is how you bring innovation and think outside the box. And so that innovative piece was also really important for me to observe and learn from our local partners. And so from that point, I knew that learning about this systemic poverty, learning about strengthening my solidarity, strengthening compassion values, and cultivating, just a greater appreciation of these social injustices was building in me. Something was building in me, and I can easily say that it was life-changing. I started reading lots of books about history, anthropology, sociology. I even broke up with my girlfriend at the time. I knew, don't worry, I was very nice, but I knew that our values were incompatible in the direction I knew I was going. It just wasn't going to work. And at that point, I declared, forget about that PhD program in chemistry. I'm going to medical school just for this. And I promised myself that I was not going to stray from my course, and I'm going to be a physician that's focused on the underserved. So that led me to IU Medical School. My first 2 years, if you're from Terre Haute, I'm not trying to be offensive, but I was in Terre Haute for 2 years. I was not very happy there, but that's a whole nother story. And my first summer in 2005, my first summer after first year of med school, I wanted to improve my Spanish language ability, especially medical Spanish. And so I spent the summer in Guatemala. I just Google searched a school, and there's a really well-known Spanish language school called Pope Wu. And Pope Wu was a Spanish language school. They also had community outreach programs to indigenous rural villages. So I go there, I learned Spanish, and I was also able to participate in these community service activities. Now my teacher, her name's Patty, she is an indigenous woman, fantastic Spanish language teacher. But she was also very good at challenging me on these principles of social injustice, solidarity, and really pushing me to question what is my role. And so she shared that Pope Wu had this vision. They want to create a medical program where they're able to not just do these small community service projects, but actually deliver healthcare in a sustainable manner to these indigenous villages in the rural highlands of Guatemala. And I thought, well, I know about this great organization called Timmy Foundation, that time Timmy Foundation. And she said, with an eye of skepticism, she said, great, but we get a lot of gringos that come here and make promises, never hear from them again, but I hope you're different. So I remember excitedly coming back to Indianapolis, going straight to the Timmy office, which at that time was in the basement of Glendale Mall. And I met up with Scott Keller, the director at the time, told him this idea, this partnership that just had to happen. And he was like, this sounds great. I agree. It sounds like this is something that could be a potential new Timmy project, but the reality is we don't have the staffing right now. We don't have the resources to take this on, but maybe you can. And I said, I'm just a student. I'm in med school right now. It's like second year of med school is the hardest year for book work. And he was like, well, we'll give you a blueprint. We'll give you the template. You can do it. So I go back to Terre Haute, and one of my good friends, Bob Parker, who also went on his first Timmy trip as an undergrad at Purdue, he and I were living together, and where we should have been studying, we were on international phone calls. There was no Skype, there was no FaceTime. International phone calls to Patty and her colleagues in Guatemala. We were building budgets, we were learning how to procure medications, getting volunteers, fundraising, etc. And I distinctly remember that point where I thought, well, I'm not studying as hard as I should be, but perhaps this is the most important piece of education I'll get. So, in order for this to be successful, I had to have people. So I went to Chuck first, of course. And for those of you who know Chuck, he was, of course, on board immediately. Of course, I'm going to follow this med student that wants me to sacrifice my New Year's to go to Guatemala and a village that I've never been to, but he has, so why not? And so with Chuck's enthusiasm and support, we were able to get an all-star cast, which some of you are actually here. So Anna Welsh, who's here, her daughter Shelley, Jean Orr, Andy McGovern, Tammy Trong, and several others. So there was this great cast. There was about 10 of us to explore Pope Wu in Guatemala becoming the next Timmy partner. I was nervous. I was like, I hope I'm not dragging all these people to another country, sacrificing their New Year's for nothing. Our very first leg was to Houston to Guatemala. That Houston to Guatemala flight got canceled. So we were off to a terrible start. So that night, we're sleeping in this hotel. I'm sitting across from Chuck, just shaking my head, but he was like, don't worry, Paul, we'll figure it out. Long story short, it was a success. Our colleagues in Guatemala, Patty and others, did a remarkable job of adjusting, adapting, introducing us to the communities, introducing us to the needs, giving that bilateral exchange of knowledge, insights, and values, and really showing us not just what the problems are, but what the potential solutions are, and what the role of Timmy Global Health can and should be. It was a successful trip. We come back, and long story short, it's now one of the main partnerships for Timmy Global Health. It's now known as the 32 Volcanis. So 32 Volcanis is kind of a partner agency with Pope Wu. And so, as many of you know, we're able to support them to have sustained primary care in these rural villages, and also have a well-stocked pharmacy, electronic medical record systems, and supporting local physicians to lead the way and continue to teach us what the needs are and how to properly deliver care in their communities. So you can see that my parents really laid the foundation of this exchange where I was able to build these important values of solidarity and compassion. And Timmy Global Health was the catalyst to really accelerate those values to become even stronger through these avenues of bilateral exchange, knowledge, resources, and values. And that was just the start. Long story short, I would then go on to finish my med school by taking a gap year, which again, my parents weren't happy about, but I took a gap year in Kenya at the IU Kenya partnership known as AMPATH, did a combined internal medicine and global health residency at Duke University, spent another year in Kenya. Then I worked for Partners in Health, a nonprofit based in Boston that works in several countries around the world. Lived in Rwanda for 4 years, spent the later 4 years in Boston, traveling around the world, focusing about 5 low-income countries. And during that time, doing clinical work in the US, supporting Navajo Nation in New Mexico and the Wampanoag tribe in Massachusetts. And now most recently, I moved to Seattle about a year and a half ago, a little under 2 years, and as mentioned, worked for Solid Ground, focusing on the social determinants of health for vulnerably housed and those facing food insecurity in the Seattle area. This is my Timmy Global Health journey. All of that is from Timmy Global Health. If I never met Chuck, if I never went on that first Timmy trip, none of this would have happened. These trips, first and foremost, teach humility. We are not going there as saviors. This is not international health or international medicine. This is Timmy Global Health. We are there to give and receive in a beautiful bilateral exchange, knowledge, resources, and values, such as compassion and solidarity. Investing in Timmy is not just an investment into the healthcare of those who are unfortunate, those who are most vulnerable, and those citizens of the global community. It's also an investment in our youth right here in the US, to be humble, to learn about poverty and its root causes, and to be able to produce innovative solutions with local partners. And I promise you from firsthand experience, it's an investment in becoming more compassionate and more committed to the most vulnerable in this global community. So with that, I would like to end with my favorite quote from Chuck. If you haven't read Pint-Sized Profits, you need to. And he says, "The beauty of this work is when you allow yourself to get close enough to these kids, your heart will be broken. And at the same time healed, if you actually allow that to happen. They make us more compassionate, to make us more kind, and to make us more human." So with that, I want to thank my parents, Chuck, Timmy board, Timmy staff, volunteers, and all of you who are supporting Timmy. Because I promise you, I'm just one of many examples where Timmy trips can make the most profound impact throughout the global community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Park.